Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be diving into the newest issue of National Geographic History magazine. I put up a poll in my community tab asking you guys which of these articles you wanted me to read, and the winner was about Dionysus and the Duomo of Florence. You can see here on the cover. So let's just dive right in. And don't worry if you wanted one of the other topics. These magazines aren't going anywhere. I can always pull them back up and we can read those another day, so don't worry. So we're starting off with the wild Greek and Roman god Dionysus. Lord of wine and intoxication, the twice-born deity inspired dramatic myths, theater festivals, and mysterious cults all over the ancient world. Let's see. Dionysus was so much more than just the master of the vine. He was also charged with fertility, fruitfulness, theater, ecstasy, and abandon. Whether called Dionysus, his Greek name, or Bacchus, his Roman one, he is perhaps the strangest of the gods in the vast classical pantheons. Though his pagan-like cults and mysteries may seem to have existed outside the usual Greco-Roman religious and philosophical spheres, archaeological evidence in the 20th century proved that he was a fully realized god. The son of an immortal god and a mortal princess, Dionysus's role forged a crucial link between humanity and the divine, serving as a force of cyclical, unbridled nature who drew men and women out of themselves through intoxication. In that sense, Dionysus, a genial but wild and dangerously ravishing intermediary, represents one of the endearing mysteries and paradoxes of life. Dionysus's association with wine embodies this paradox. Wine is a delicious beverage with medicinal properties, but it also intoxicates. It brings liberation and ecstasy, yet, like any initiatory experience, it also introduced the risks of losing hold of identity and control. Births and deaths. Many of the myths centered on Dionysus come from different sources. One of the most popular, the Bibliotheca, is a 1st or 2nd century CE compendium of myths that draws on earlier sources, such as the Homeric hymns from the 7th to 6th centuries BCE, as well as earlier Greek plays and poems. These texts supply a standard story of Dionysus's birth. Like many of Zeus's children, Dionysus was not the son of Zeus's wife and queen Hera, but the product of an extramarital affair. In the Bibliotheca, Zeus falls in love with a mortal princess Semele, and the two conceive a child. When Hera discovers the relationship, her jealousy drives her to try to destroy Semele and her unborn son. Disguised as a mortal, Hera plants a seed of doubt in the young woman's mind that her lover isn't a god, and then gives her away to obtain proof. Semele follows Hera's plan and has Zeus swear an unbreakable oath to grant her any wish. Then she asks Zeus to appear before her in all his divine glory. Because of his oath, Zeus cannot refuse and reveals his divinity, a sight that mortals cannot withstand. Semele burns to ashes. Zeus manages to save their unborn son and sews him into his own leg. When gestation is complete, Dionysus bursts forth from Zeus's thigh. This graphic and gruesome episode is not an unprecedented one in Greek mythology. Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare, was born similarly, emerging fully formed from Zeus's head. Dionysus thus became known as the twice-born god. After his extraordinary rebirth, Zeus entrusts the infant Dionysus to the messenger god Hermes. The baby is shielded from Hera and cared for and raised by nymphs. Hera's jealous rage does not end with Semele's death. She aims to punish Semele's son too, and decides to drive Dionysus mad. Stricken, the young god wanders aimlessly through the lands east of Greece, winding up first in Phrygia, a kingdom in the west-central part of Anatolia, which is now modern Turkey. There, the mother goddess Cybele, whose own cult was associated with and apparently resembled Dionysus's retinue, purifies him, perhaps recognizing a kindred spirit. Wanderings and wine. Cured of his madness, Dionysus continues to travel, and he is not alone. In many of the tales surrounding him, he is accompanied by an entourage who worship Dionysus in a state of drunken revelry, holding lavish festal orgia or rites in his honor. Among them are nymphs called Maenads, also known as the Bacchae or Bacchantes, who form the crux of his traveling retinue, the Dionysus. Pan, the hirsute fertility god and associated with shepherds, often took part along with satyrs and Seleni, wild creatures that were part man, part beast. The Dionysus comprised animals such as big cats, like leopards, tigers, and lynx, and snakes as well. The group brings the gift of wine wherever it goes. Dionysus's Odyssey takes him from Greece across Turkey and into Asia. Some modern scholars theorize that ancient Greeks believed that anywhere grapevines could be found and wine was cultivated, Dionysus had once visited. When Dionysus reaches India on a chariot pulled by panthers, he conquers the land with wine and dance rather than weapons and war. Dionysus encounters different peoples, and not all welcome him. Those who reject his teachings are swiftly and brutally punished. In Thrace, which is parts of modern Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey today, he encounters King Lycurgus, who refuses to recognize his status as a god and imprisons his followers. There he goes, by the way. To demonstrate his power, Dionysus drives the king insane. Lycurgus kills his own son after mistaking him for a grapevine. Recovering his senses, the king is horrified, but Dionysus is not satisfied. He demands that the king be put to death, or no fruit will grow in the kingdom. On hearing that, the king's people seize Lycurgus and feed him to man-eating horses to appease the god. A similar incident occurs in Thebes, the native city of Dionysus's mother, the Princess Semele. The story is the basis of Euripides' dramatic masterpiece of the late 5th century BCE, the Bacchae. The god's cousin, King Pentheus, opposes the Dionysian cult and provokes the god's anger. Pentheus spies on a group of Theban women practicing their bacchanalian rites on a mountainside. The frenzied women, which included Pentheus's own mother, Agave, like the plant? Okay. Mistake him for a wild animal and tear him apart with their bare hands in their intoxication. Dionysus was not always cruel. When a band of Tyrrhenian pirates kidnapped the god off the west coast of what is now Italy, Dionysus responds by having grapevines sprout all over the ship. Realizing they were in the presence of a god, the terrified pirates threw themselves into the sea. Rather than let them drown, Dionysus transformed the sailors into dolphins. Performance and mysteries. Worship of Dionysus was not uniform in the classic world. Some of it was public and organized, while other rituals were mysterious and carried out in secret. Many Greeks showed their reverence for Dionysus through festivals. In Rome, where he was called Bacchus, these became the Bacchanalia, wild rituals celebrated at nights in forests and mountains. The Maenads would enter a delirious state of ecstasy, then, inspired by the personification of Dionysus in the form of a priest, dance wildly before setting out on a hunt. In Hellenic culture, Dionysus embodied a symbol of communal cohesion and reconciliation, closely connected with the theater. Every March, the city of Athens would hold a festival known as the Great Dionysia, also called the City Dionysia. Dating as early as the 6th century BCE, this dramatic festival lasted as many as 6 days. This is the remains of the theater where that was held, apparently. On the first day, a procession would open the festival as a statue of Dionysus was borne to his theater. I thought it said broad. After the day's performances, a bull would be sacrificed and a feast held. In the days that followed, ancient Greece's playwrights would present their works, tragedies, comedies, and satiric drama, and compete for top honors. According to tradition, tragedy was originally related to songs from the Dionysian feast of the Tragos, goat, and Oidos, song. Actors who gave the best performances would also be awarded prizes. Those taking first place would be given wreaths of ivy in a nod to the patron god of wine. Dionysus was also worshipped through a series of secret rituals known today as the Dionysian mysteries. These are thought to have evolved from an unknown cult that spread throughout the Mediterranean region alongside the dissemination of wine, though it's possible that mead was the original sacrament. As the patron of the Dionysian mysteries, secret rites to which only initiates were admitted, such as those performed in honor of Demeter, goddess of agriculture, and later Isis, originally from Egypt, and Mithras, originally from Iran, Dionysus was a disruptive deity, entering civilization and throwing out the established order. When he arrived, liberation and transgression had their turn. Outsider or Olympian? At first glance, these mysteries and the orgiastic rites that surrounded Dionysus seem to run counter to the harmonious and ordered view of classical Greek religion. For this reason, many scholars, especially of the German tradition, for a long time did not believe that Dionysus could be truly Hellenic. They considered him to be a foreign god, perhaps Thracian or Phrygian, and discounted the possibility that the myths around his death and resurrection could be Greek. Positivist scholars of the 19th century argued that Dionysus was an imported rather than a Greek god, and that the Maenads existed only in myth and literature. These preconceptions changed over the course of the 20th century. In 1953, thanks to the decipherment of Linear B script, the writing system used by the Mycenaean civilization, which predates the Greek alphabet by several centuries, researchers learned that Dionysus was indeed known in Greece. That's Pentheus being ripped apart. He was known in Greece as far back as 13th century BCE. Wow. Ancient Mycenaean tablets found in the palace of Pylos in the Peloponnese region of southern Greece mention his name and prove that Dionysus was not a god adopted from abroad, but a profoundly Greek divinity. Evidence of the Maenads' existence has been found as well in Greek inscriptions from various time periods. Apparently, there really were groups of women who would reach such a state of delirium under the influence of Dionysus's priestly incarnation that they were prepared to rip apart live animals and eat their raw flesh. Divine influence. Dionysus was thus a fully Greek god, whose popularity has spanned different time periods and guises. He is depicted as both a beautifully effeminate, long-haired youth and a corpulent, bearded, mature man. The Greek Dionysus and the Roman Bacchus are functionally the same god, but there are a few key differences. Dionysus, a noble, youthful figure in myth and classical literature, is usually listed alongside the 12 Olympian gods. Bacchus, on the other hand, is often seen as a portly older man who, according to the Roman poet Ovid, could be vengeful, using his staff as both a magic wand and a weapon against those who dared oppose his cult and its ideals of freedom. Surveying different belief systems in the ancient world, it is easy to spot Dionysus' influence in other traditions. The term Osiris Dionysus is used by some historians of religion to refer to a group of gods worshipped around the Mediterranean in the centuries prior to the emergence of Christianity. These gods shared a number of characteristics, including being male, having divine fathers and mortal virgin mothers, and being reborn as gods. Here we go. Okay, last bit. The Egyptian god Osiris, for instance, was equated with Dionysus by the Greek historian Herodotus during the 5th century BCE. By late antiquity, some Gnostic and Neoplatonist philosophers had expanded the syncretic equation to include Aeon, Adonis, and other gods of the mystery religions. Scholars also note links between the life-giving wine of the Dionysian cult and the centrality of wine in the Christian Eucharist, as well as parallels between the Greek god and Christ himself. The 6th century BCE classical cult, known as Orphism, centered on the belief that Dionysus was torn to pieces and then resurrected. 20th century thinkers such as James Frazer saw Dionysus and Christ in the context of an Eastern Mediterranean tradition of dying and rising gods, whose sacrifice and resurrection redeemed their people. Clearly, Dionysus continues to cast a long shadow. Given the prevalence and power of wine and early ecstasy, it is no mystery why. And let's see, we're going to skip right to the Duomo of Florence, the original Superdome. Symbolizing the power and prosperity of the Tuscan capital, the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore astonished the world with its colossal dome engineered by Filippo Brunelleschi. Such a magnificent building. Let's learn about it. The Florence Cathedral is, without doubt, one of the great feats of Renaissance engineering. The cathedral is dedicated to Santa Maria del Fiore, which is Saint Mary of the Flower, a reference to the lily, Florence's emblem. Its iconic and ingenious dome, which architect Filippo Brunelleschi completed in 1436, brought to fruition a project that had begun 140 years earlier. It was sculptor and architect Arnolfo di Cambio who came up with the initial plans for a new cathedral in Florence in 1296, to be built over the existing Cathedral of Santa Reparata, alongside the ancient octagonal baptistery. He worked in the Italian Gothic style, incorporating elements of late Gothic and emerging Renaissance design, but when he died in 1310, work on the cathedral came to a halt. Then in the 1330s, the Opera del Duomo, the institution in charge of the building works, was taken over by the Wool Guild, the dominant group in Florentine politics, who came up with the funds to continue building the great cathedral. A string of eminent architects filled the role of capomaestro, or master builder, in the years to come. The master painter Giotto was appointed to the role in 1334 and began the construction of the freestanding bell tower that now bears his name. The first great wave of the Black Death hit Florence in 1348, killing between 45 and 75% of the population. Construction on the cathedral, overseen in that dark period by capomaestro Francesco Talenti, stalled once again. By 1355, only the side walls and part of the main facade of the project were anywhere near completion. Talenti extended the main nave, increasing the length of the church to 500 feet, and completed Giotto's 280-foot-tall bell tower. The Persian model. In 1359 or 1360, Giovanni di Lapogini succeeded Talenti as capomaestro. He faced the challenge of designing a dome that could cover the huge transepts. Another Italian architect, Neri di Fioravanti, came up with a proposal that would avoid external structures such as buttresses, using rings of stone and wood hidden within the dome's shell. These chains would function like iron rings on a barrel, preventing the structure from splitting apart. Fioravanti's proposal, without Gothic additions, was pitched against the more conservative design proposed by Giovanni di Lapo. In 1367, the Opera del Duomo opted for Fioravanti's idea, but with a caveat. The pillars of the transept would be enlarged, and the dome would increase in diameter to 180 feet. Fioravanti rose to the challenge by suggesting a dome with a double shell, a robust inner layer on which a second lighter skin would rest as protection against the elements. It was the first time that this type of design, originating in Persia and popular in Islamic architecture, had been applied in Europe. Fioravanti proposed an octagonal dome with 8 stone ribs that that would crown the cathedral. I think that's a typo. Fioravante created a maquette, or scale model, of his design, which was put on display inside the unfinished cathedral. It became an object of faith that the plan could and would be put into practice. Every year, the Opera del Duomo and its architects swore an oath on the maquette and on the Bible, reaffirming their commitment to complete the dome as specified. No one could doubt their fervent support of Fioravante's design. But was it feasible? In 1418, once the base of the dome was finished, the Opera del Duomo launched a competition to find an architect who would make the dome a reality. Winning the contest. Known to his friends as Pippo, Filippo Brunelleschi was born in Florence in 1377 and spent his childhood in the family home opposite the construction site where the cathedral was gradually taking form. Perhaps growing up in the shadow of the unfinished Santa Maria del Fiore and seeing Fioravante's domed maquette inside inspired Brunelleschi to puzzle out how such an ambitious dome could be built. Gaining renown as a goldsmith and sculptor, in 1401 Brunelleschi entered an architectural contest to create new doors for Florence's Baptistery of San Giovanni, the octagonal building that stands alongside the cathedral. The challenge, a set of doors even more magnificent than those designed some 70 years earlier by Andrea Pisano. On that occasion, Brunelleschi lost to Lorenzo Ghiberti. Defeated, he moved to Rome with his friend Donatello, and for the next 15 years he immersed himself in the study of ancient Roman architecture. It is said that he rediscovered the principles of linear perspective developed by the Greeks and Romans. Brunelleschi returned to Florence between 1416 and 1417. When the contest for designing the dome was announced in 1418, Brunelleschi was already one of the favorites, along with his great rival Ghiberti. The proposals that were submitted all had to stick closely to Fioravante's design. What the judges were really looking for was what engineering system the competing architects could come up with to support the huge dome while it was under construction. Some proposals envisaged wooden props supporting the walls of the dome while it was going up. Another alternative was to fill the transept with sand to create a mound on which the dome would rest during construction, a solution the Opera del Duomo rejected, obviously. Brunelleschi, meanwhile, offered a startling and radical proposal. He claimed that he would build the vast dome without using any support systems at all. This idea caused a sensation. No one could grasp how it would work, although Brunelleschi refused to reveal the engineering details. So pretty. He was such a respected architect and had performed so well on other projects for the Wool Guild that he clinched the commission. In 1420, his audacious design was approved on condition that he share the plans with his rival Ghiberti. Sabotage and success. That same year, a memorandum was drawn up listing the project's structural principles. Brunelleschi confirmed the dome would have a double shell, and he included the dimensions of the structural rings. He stressed once again that he would build it without any external support, but exactly how remained unclear. Today, no documentation survives that explicitly explains his engineering behind the dome. Much of what is known comes through observation and analysis of the finished work. Early on in the construction of the dome, the disappointed Ghiberti and his faction used various stratagems to sabotage Brunelleschi's proposal. They accused him of deviating from Fioravante's original project and of committing structural errors in the building work. They even grew so desperate that they complained that the dome's design made the cathedral interior too dark. None of these controversies succeeded in holding back the project, though. After the base of the dome reached the agreed-upon height in 1426, approval was granted for the work to continue without any supporting structures. In 1429, cracks caused by the weight of the dome were beginning to appear in the cathedral, but Brunelleschi fixed them with reinforcements of iron and wood. Slowly, layer by layer, the dome rose with no need of any scaffolding. Drawing on his experience, Brunelleschi designed hoists to facilitate the work. These involved innovative uses of cogs and shafts, and they were equipped with various speeds and a reversible gear. Years later, Brunelleschi's devices would be studied and sketched by another brilliant Renaissance mind, Leonardo da Vinci. I think this is what it looks like underneath the dome. Very cool. Oh, and there's the completed dome on the inside. So cool. Through the 1430s, construction was hampered by cash flow problems, wage cuts, and a shortage of building materials. But Brunelleschi struggled on and in 1436 was vindicated. The magnificent dome was completed successfully, and Pope Eugenius IV consecrated the cathedral. Brunelleschi, however, was not given carte blanche in designing the lantern that would finish the mighty work. Once again, a competition was held, and once again Brunelleschi's design won out over that of his rivals. Drawing on his brilliance as a sculptor, he carved a model from chestnut wood, but he died in 1446 before it could be placed. His design for the lantern was finally completed and placed over the dome in 1471, topped with a copper sphere, the palla, designed by Andrea del Verrocchio. In the 16th century, work continued on the cathedral, including the spectacular interior decoration of the dome, a stunning rendering of the Last Judgment begun by Giorgio Vasari. The facade of the cathedral was left unfinished and was dismantled in 1587. 3 centuries later, it was rebuilt in a neo-Gothic design that sought to revive the stylistic principles originally proposed by Giotto in the 14th century. 15th century Italian architect and polymath Leon Battista Alberti marveled at Brunelleschi's great achievement. Quote, "Whoever would be envious enough to deny praise to the architect Pippo, seeing such a structure towering over the skies? It is wide enough to cast its shadow over all the Tuscan people, made as it is without any beam or wooden supports. It is hard to believe that this was done at this time when nothing of the kind was ever to be seen in antiquity." End quote. According to historical tradition, Filippo Brunelleschi was buried under the cathedral. The tradition, it turned out, was true. In 1972, his tomb was found in the crypt, in the shadow of his own gravity-defying dome. So incredible. So that is going to be it for tonight. I would love to read more, but it is boiling hot in here. I'm sweating. And I'm a little ticky tonight. You know, I've got my physical tick, so I'm gonna calm down and leave the magazine alone for the night. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope that you found this video relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a very good